Gauging job satisfaction is by no means an exact science and can take on many different forms for many different people. However, the latest numbers measuring such a thing from Gallup and Statista ought to give employers and corporate leaders reason to celebrate. The two entities reported in October of 2021 that there were 45 million full-time workers in the U.S. who were satisfied and content with their jobs. So the question becomes, how do we keep this sentiment on an upward trajectory? Lisa Marie Platske may have the answers to this intriguing riddle. She's a leadership expert and best-selling author who's been recognized by the White House and the Small Business Administration for her work in leadership. Her mission is to transform lives through leadership by teaching mission-driven and service-based entrepreneurs, consultants, and corporate executives how to live out their big mission in the world. She joined me this week to have a discussion about leadership development, prosperity, and how we can grow our business professionals into effective leaders of today and tomorrow. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation.
That.
Absolutely. So Lisa Marie, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm excited to talk to you all about leadership this afternoon. Lovely to see you, and thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, Lisa Marie, I know that you spend your working days helping people transform the way they think about leadership. So I'm wondering if you can tell me all about it.
Sure. So transform the way people think about leadership is a great way of expressing it, because most people believe that leadership is something you do. It's the act of leading. You do that. And what I've learned on the journey is that leadership starts with self, and it starts with how you show up in the world, how you be, the beingness of leadership. And so the brand or the form of leadership I'm more interested in is, the soulful leader, not the one that does all of the tactical things. So I believe those are important too. It's just that it starts with self.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I'm curious to get your thoughts on what do you think effective leadership looks like in business?
That is the $1 million question, Kevin. What is effective? And I love that you use that word, because too often I hear people speak about efficient leadership, efficient, and yet you can be efficient and get lots of things done and never get the right things done. So effective leadership to me is having impact, being somebody who is a force for good on the planet. Those are effective leaders, one that move the needle, that affect change, even if it's just 1% a day, so that the influence that they have has a lasting resonance on the planet.
Yeah, I'm also wondering your thoughts on sort of your rallying cry when you work with your clients about stepping into the souls of your calling and making a big difference. So I'm wondering if you can tell me all about it.
Sure. So I've when I first started and opened my business, Kevin and I went out and I came from federal law enforcement. And so I opened my business 17 years ago and wanted a shortcut. That's really the truth. I wanted to learn how could you fast track leadership. And what I discovered on that journey after interviewing hundreds of leaders in nonprofits, in a variety of industries, I found 7 pillars of leadership, 7 pillars that were themes that came up over and over and over again in interviews with people. And as I was in those 7 pillars and teaching them, I learned that there were individuals that may have, one of those pillars missing or something, an element of it missing. And really it was their own personal journey. And so the this idea of, your soul's deepest calling, the piece where I was finding people who they were like something was missing, like their life was good. It's not like something was really major that was broken, but it's like they had this understanding that there was something bigger they were to do, a bigger impact to make, a bigger mark on the world, something that was theirs and theirs alone. And so I wanted to dive into what are the elements that it takes to take that journey. Like what happens when you take that journey. And one of the components that came up, the one that's to me the one of the most important to speak about, is courage. And and to have the courage to understand that what got you here won't necessarily get you there. And it takes a lot of courage to take everything that you've been doing and to scrap it and to start from step one. And I've done this many, many, many times in my business.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about your non-traditional start in business coming from federal law enforcement. I'm wondering how that experience has helped you transform into an effective business leader and speaker, and how do you think we can achieve better business sustainability in today's business climate?
I never would have thought that law enforcement would have been as important on the journey. I knew that leadership is leadership is leadership, and the components and elements of leadership are the same across the board. What I didn't realize is that law enforcement, so much of it was about an education in human behavior, learning about humans, how they behave, how they show up, and really that we all want the exact same thing on the journey, to be valued and appreciated and respected. And so when I look at, those components in law enforcement and what it taught me in being around fellow humans and seeing both the not so good, some of the ugly, and also seeing some of the beautiful sides in law enforcement of people coming together, like after 9/11, and coming together for a greater purpose to help their fellow man. And so when I look at today, in today's world, there's what I look at is both me leadership, meaning leadership starts with self, and you can't get to we leadership, which a lot of people speak about, the collaborative element of leadership and how much it's needed in today's world, until you get good on me leadership, on yourself, on what it is that who you are, what you want, why it matters. You can't you can't effectively collaborate and build bridges and do meaningful work with others without really first understanding your own leadership journey and what you're seeking to do on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. That segues nicely into my next question about empowerment and sort of finding your voice in business. What do you think that entails as people embark on their own business journey?
Well, though, going back to law enforcement, I look at there were detectives who in law enforcement are really great at asking questions. Just like a journalist is very similar, which is your field. In the world of journalists ask questions. They ask the who, the what, the where, the when, the how of a situation. They figure out the why. There's this sense of curiosity. And so when you're looking at crafting a vision that matters, you do that. You look at, well, what is it that you want? Why do you want it? Where do you want it? How do you want it to show up? In what way? You ask the questions. So when someone comes to me and says, well, I would really love to be able to make a bigger impact in my community, or I want to do it in my family, or I want a promotion, or I want to be able to speak on more stages. Looking at that, asking those questions like, who do you want to be in front of? Um, when do you want to be in front of them? In what manner? How? What are you doing? Even for people who say that they want to speak, well, is it TEDx? Is it being able to speak on podcasts? Is it being able to speak at corporate symposiums, or is it to speak on a um, one of the clubhouse events? What are you really looking at? And then why is it important? So as you go through those questions that every good journalist would ask, or every good detective would ask, you're you're getting clearer and clearer on the vision that you're called to live out. And for me, clarity is the superpower for vision. The clearer you are, the easier it is to implement a plan with steps that actually matter and are useful.
It's easy to find your purpose that way, isn't it?
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
Yeah, and Lisa Marie, I'm all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as you know from doing research on me, I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. And I'm always excited because part of my background is helping individuals with disabilities find gainful employment. So I'm wondering, when you look at diversity, equity, and inclusion in the context of individuals with disabilities, how do you think we can create an environment for increased opportunities for that segment of our population?
Well, what I believe is that it's about looking at, you use the word effective. It's about looking at ensuring that in your organization is as effective as possible. And that means that you need variety of perspectives, a variety of different personalities, and what people bring to the table. And so organizations that have a great leadership mindset understand that, and understand what's why that's important. And I'll give you an example. So the person who is, he calls himself the jack of all trades. However, he handles my accounting, and he's the caretaker in the business, and office manager, and does a lot of things for me in the business. And Cole happens to be deaf. And so um, there are a lot of organizations that have said, well, when he's gone to apply, they weren't willing to pay for the equipment that it requires. And for he and what I realize is that he brings such a depth of and wealth of information that when I have conversations with him, I am just I learn so much. He is 20 years younger than I am. What he actually brings to the table is just magnificent. And so why I bring that up is because organizations, what I've learned for myself is I don't try to convince somebody, a client or a colleague that my work is valuable. What I do is I seek to go to the opportunities and the places that have the kind of mindset that I do, which is open to new perspectives, open to new possibilities. And so, organizations like that, they are seeking diversity from the perspective of making them stronger, making them better, providing new insights into the organization. And so I've had a variety of people who've worked in my organization who've had MS and who've been in wheelchair and who have had other what I would consider to be just special abilities. They've got things that they do that how they see the world and what they have brought to my organization and making me increasing my own awareness at my events has been something that's been priceless. So, for me, it's do research on organizations that are forward thinking organizations that seek perspectives that really uh, are vast and wide and are seeking to be as effective as they possibly can on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes to your sort of one of the mottos you live by in business, that success is just beyond your comfort zone. So I'm wondering if you can dive into that for me.
Yeah. So I I like being comfortable, Kevin. Like I like comfortable. Comfortable feels good. It's like it's comfortable. And yet I've learned that being comfortable doesn't change the world. Like being comfortable isn't what creates magic. And so when I was looking at, well, what does change the world? What I learned is that vulnerability does. Being vulnerable, being uncomfortable, being around people that challenge how I think, that see the world differently, and also sharing pieces of my story that I'd rather not share. And so, comfort doesn't change the world. Vulnerability changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, how do you think when we look at vulnerability, failure, and adversity, how do you think it can act as a positive in business?
Well, I've learned that when I became friends with failure, life worked a little easier for me. So, being willing to share the things that are not all of the pretty stuff, but the parts of my life that show that I should have been a statistic and not a success. I should have been, I grew up in a family that was, wrought with domestic violence, and I called the police quite a bit as a kid. And um, my dad um was in prison more than once. And when you have experiences like that, they can be shame inducing. And it can feel like, well, you shouldn't talk about those things, certainly not to people in business who might hire you. And yet I've learned that hiding any pieces doesn't that's not good. It's not um it's inauthentic, and people can tell you're hiding something. That doesn't mean you spill your guts and you share everything that's going on all times with everybody. It's just that vulnerability has the ability to allow other people to feel comfortable and drop their own walls.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me, I'm curious, for you personally, what are you most grateful for in life?
I'm grateful for the ability to wake up. Like when my eyes open and I just say, thank you, God, for another day. I am incredibly grateful for the gift of life, to be alive right now. I'm incredibly grateful for my husband. I'm grateful for opportunities, like like you giving me the opportunity to be here and just to spend a few moments of our lives together and connect. I'm grateful for the tiniest little moments, every meal I sit down and eat, and the food that came from farmers, or it my life is just wrought with gratitude. So my list is long.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, before this started, you shared with me that you just moved to a farm. So I'm wondering, how did moving during a pandemic work out for you?
Yeah, it was, I was not planning on moving. Honestly, in July, I showed up at this place as an Airbnb, and the place was for sale, and the Holy Spirit said I should buy it. And so my husband and I had a conversation, and the rest is history. We took us about 5 months, and a couple of other, um, twists and turns to get to the closing, but I've been there now for 30 days, and it is magnificent, like truly magnificent, to be living on this farm. And after moving from outside the Washington, D.C. area and closer to a city, and now being, in 75 acres and with farmland, gosh, I mean, you ask about it being in the middle of a pandemic, and I don't know that that changed anything for me, in that um it just I still hired wonderful people to help, and still had my team. And I suppose the energies on the planet have been different. But neighbors very welcoming. Everybody came over, and in the neighborhood, I mean, the closest neighbor is like a mile and a half away, but within several miles, people came over. Just feel really grateful, Kevin, really grateful.
And the sense of community goes a long way, doesn't it?
Yes, yes. Yeah, it makes me not feel so alone.
Absolutely. And my final question for you, Lisa Marie, is I'm wondering for you, how do you want your personal and professional legacy to be defined?
Ralph Waldo Emerson is one of my favorite authors, and he has a poem called "What is Success?" And he speaks about, in the poem, is it a flower? Is it a child? And he goes on in the poem, and at the end of the poem, he says, "To understand one life has breathed easier because I have lived. This is to have succeeded." And when I was in high school, I cut that out and I put that on my, I glue, had it, typed it out on a, you know, before the day of computers. I typed it out in a typewriter and carried it with me in college, carried it with me in my 20s, and it sits in my desk. And and I'm in my 50s now. So I've been doing this. I've had this piece for almost 40 years that I've carried with me. And the idea of understanding that one life has breathed easier. In fact, it'll move me to tears. Like, I can feel myself starting to well up. That the responsibility of doing good for others. That's why I have my gifts and abilities and talents and experiences, is to do good. And so that involves being of service, being a contribution to others. And that's what I see my legacy as
Yeah, when you contribute to the success of others, your own personal rewards multiply. It's sort of the
yeah,
motto I live my life by too. So I can
yeah.
understand that for sure. But finally, just very quickly, what if people want to get connected with you, Lisa Marie? What's the best way they can do that?
Best way they can do that, upsidethinking.com is my website, and it's a place to start your upside journey. There's a blueprint there to download, and an opportunity to connect with me personally. And so go there, upsidethinking.com, UPSIDE, and the word thinking, THINKING.com.
Fantastic. Well, Lisa Marie, as I shared with you before we started recording this afternoon, you're my first podcasting interview for the year. I had a delightful time talking to you about leadership and personal growth, and I want to thank you for your work in the space and for joining me this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all the good you do on the world, for the interviews that you've put out, for the and a variety of different topics, and for just the willingness to be so present here today. I'm deeply grateful, and it's a pleasure and a delight.